I was a little kid, my grandma lived on a huge farm, and I loved going to stay with her because I adored animals, and a farm was any little kid's dreamland. She owned a lot of land, and my brother and I were allowed to go anywhere we wanted as long as we stayed on the property and came back before dark. One day, we decided to follow a creek all the way to its end, which resulted in us crossing the fence and leaving my grandma's property. We soon came across an old, rundown cabin, and for some reason we decided to go inside, just young curiosity, I guess. As we stepped inside, it was as if we walked into a totally different cabin. From the outside, it was very old and almost falling apart, but on the inside, it was as if a family lived there. There were dishes on the table, as if they had just had dinner, and it actually smelled like spaghetti. The beds were all made up perfectly, the furniture outdated but still in good condition, and the floor and wallpaper were well maintained, with no dust or cobwebs, no dirt or damp smell. It was warm, as if the family left in a hurry and left all of their belongings behind, and definitely not that long ago. We ran all the way back to my grandma's house, excited to tell her about our new discovery. After a good scolding about leaving the property and a game of 20 questions, my grandma wanted to see this place for herself. We all set off to find the cabin, following the creek as we had done before, past the fence, all the way out to where the cabin was. Except this time, there was no cabin. It was gone. We looked for an hour trying to find it, and couldn't. My grandma finally decided it was time to go back. She was pretty mad at us for leaving the property, but she never discredited our claims of seeing this cabin. Looking back, lots of weird things happened on the farm, things I never realized until I was older. The supernatural seems drawn to my grandma and my brother. They both have had many paranormal experiences that just weren't happening to me. Since the early 2000s, I'd wanted my own small-scale farm. I think the popular term is hobby farm. While I have no intention of having thousands of acres or a large herd of cattle, I am hoping to make a go of it year-round. Just last year, I found 30 acres close to town. This specific parcel had been part of a larger farm, but was broken off for a member of the owner's family. That family member recently passed away. The house was in good shape, but the outbuildings had seen better days. I began to tear down immediately, with the help of some friends. I was able to get the hay barn completed in a fairly short order. I moved on to a second, smaller storage building, however. During the winter, our work slowed. By late spring, the roof was all we had left. Most of it was completed when I had an accident. I was alone, putting on shingles, and lost my footing, falling and breaking my arm. The injury didn't stop me from working my real job during the healing period. I took all the overtime I could. I'd been avoiding it until then, but it's nice to have all that extra money. I plan on putting it towards supplies to build a chicken tractor and get some chickens. Unfortunately, during this time, I lost a family member of my own. He and I had been very close when I was growing up. Since my father spent much of his time on the road, his younger brother would help any way he could. Any major occasions my dad was unable to attend, my uncle always made sure to record it for him. It was a lot like having two dads. My mom also liked having him around. Most of her time was dedicated to my disabled sister, and she feared I wasn't getting enough attention. You can see how important he'd become to my family and myself. His loss has been very hard on me. I found myself brooding on his death more than I should have, until this past week when I made a disturbing discovery in the woodshop. My doctor had given me the all clear. The cast was off, and I was free to get back to the farm work. My friends had finished the shingling for me, so I moved on to the last job, a decent-sized building used for woodworking and carpentry. The benches were still in good shape. I disassembled and stored them. After a cursory inspection, I determined the frame was still solid, so I started by pulling up the floor. The boards from which it was made were rotten and full of holes. I'd made it about halfway when I found an old tin box under a loose board. It was square, about the size of a lunchbox. Inside, I discovered a few old trinkets and a stack of photographs. The trinkets included some rings, an old lighter, and even a metal beret with a bow on it. The photos had been placed face down. I pulled out a stack and turned them over. Most were nude or partially clothed young women from the 80s and 90s. Many were old and faded. As I flipped through, something struck me as odd about them. Soon, I realized what it was. None of the women were smiling. A lot looked scared, in fact. I began turning them over and discovered each had a name and year written on the back. Myra 1988, Civil 1991, Stephanie 1983. I counted and found 42 in total. These weren't your average photos. The models didn't look pleased to be taking them. At that moment, a terrible idea popped into my head. I'd seen something like this before, in a documentary about a serial killer. The cops had found loads of pictures in his home, and many of the women still hadn't been identified. I also remember some killers like to keep objects from their victims. I pulled a plain gold band out of the box and turned it around until I saw a name engraved inside. The name matched one of the women in the pictures, a terrified blonde from 1981. A shiver ripped through my body. Had I found a serial killer's photo stash in the middle of Kansas? That's where my ideas seemed to fall flat. I did some research, and I couldn't find a killer active at that time, not in this part of the state. Maybe I'd jumped to conclusions, and the pictures weren't that bad. I recognized the possibility these deaths occurred under the radar. It's just hard to believe that 42 women disappeared without anyone noticing. 42. The number still amazes me. How could anyone get away with taking 42 people's lives and not be caught? That's the biggest problem with this whole theory. In all likelihood, some creep kept his sick trophies under the floor of his wood shop. But what if? Frankly, I changed my opinion every few minutes. I've sat on this box for over a week, unable to decide if I should go to the cops. Just last night, I had a nightmare. A dirty old man killed a woman in front of me. I tried to tell people, but no one would listen. I woke up soaked in sweat, shaking. That was the last straw. I've decided I'm giving it to the cops tomorrow. What happens after that is up to them. I just want to go back to my normal life as a simple wannabe farmer. However, if I hear anything new, I'll write an update. Just between us, I hope it turns out to be nothing. If it's what I think it is, it means somebody got away with murder 42 times and was never punished for it. That's perhaps the most terrifying thing. I was 17 when this story happened, 3 years ago now. I was working at an old pizza shop right on the edge of my town. For context, the town I was in is an affluent suburban town surrounded by a bypass, which loops around the town. Around my town are some farmlands and main roads, where all of the blue-collar workers moved to after the town was gentrified 15 years back. This pizza shop was around for 20 years and catered to the same blue-collar workers. It's around 9 p.m. and a call comes in for 2 pizzas and a 2-liter of soda. I'm the only driver in, so I have to take the delivery out. It's about a 10-minute drive to get to the location. There, I had to drive up along a gravel driveway that took 5 minutes to traverse. Arriving at the place, I see a nice house and 2 barns plotted across the land with wheat around 5 feet tall surrounding the whole property. I've always been really anxious around farms because of how creepy I think they are. Being at this place, when I felt truly all alone, really started to make my anxiety flare. I decided to call the number on the order because I had no idea where this guy wanted me to go and drop off his food. After about another 5 minutes of absolute silence, the man picks up. He had a very deep and raspy voice, like he's been a career smoker, which didn't do anything to help me feel better. I was told to meet him at his truck at the far barn on his property. I am now properly scared as my mind races with all of the worst possible scenarios that could happen to me. I pull myself together and muster further into this guy's property. I see the man's truck as I round one of those cylinder storage units, and there I see his F-150 and him inside. Instead of getting out, I called him and asked him how we should do the transaction. In that same deep voice, he instructs me to get out of my car and put all of the food onto his truck bed, since he paid with his credit card already. I thought this would have been over in 10 seconds. I do what he tells me to do and walk over to the passenger window so that he can sign his receipt. The man looks to be around his mid-40s, heavy-set, with a scraggly black beard and a trucker hat. I'm a pretty skinny guy, so with my mind already racing on being kidnapped or murdered, I really don't feel safe around this guy. I asked him if he had a pen on him because I forgot to bring one. He did not have any cash on him either. He stares at me with cold eyes and points into the back of his truck, saying to me, "If you ask me for a tip, I'm going to be sticking this tip down your throat," where he has a double-barrel shotgun just in the back of his car.
I'm frozen in fear as I'm registering that this man has just threatened to kill me.
The only thing I can muster out is okay, and I get back into my car and get out of that farm. I was going so fast that I broke my car from my car, bouncing around on that gravel path. I go 80 all the way back to the pizza parlor, where I tell my coworkers what happened. None of my coworkers took me seriously and just thought I was playing this up for a joke. I go home and forget about it pretty quickly, but a year later, I'm working the lunch shift and the same man calls in and orders the pizza. At this point, I refuse to take this order, but this was during COVID, and the place was on its last legs already, so management forced me into going anyway. It was only 2 p.m. on a Sunday, so at least my fear of the dark would be covered. I get there, and the man is waiting for me at his actual house. He recognized me, and, out of all things, started apologizing to me for what he said. He was excusing it, saying that he just started going through a divorce and was struggling with his emotions. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with, and he gave me $60 for what happened. Still, to the man on the farm, I hope we never meet again.